Hi, Tribal Jazzman Scholar. I want to talk about the critical component that creativity and imagination play in our natural human development, in our normal human unfolding. We have a remarkable capacity to imagine, to create, to intuit, and I believe that largely that's a consequence of a quieted left hemisphere, the linear thinking mind. A left hemisphere in the average person, right and left-handed people are slightly different, but the majority of people are right-handed, so this is a generalization. But that capacity for imaginative thinking is really something that happens from within the right hemisphere, and it's almost as if we open ourselves up to a sort of a creative source, like an artist or a painter or a poet or an improviser of any kind. There's something that training has to do with the execution, but then there's also this just openness to the flow of ideas that seem to come to us through that quieted left mind and that awakened right mind. And people that spend a good deal of time in wild nature, for obvious reasons that I've discussed in other videos, they are very much tuned into their sensory world, and that sensory world cannot be received and observed if the left hemisphere is online and constantly thinking and chattering. I think about how many people miss their freeway exit or miss directions to a place they've gone many times because they're caught up in the mind, and the sensory connection to where they are and place and direction become overshadowed by the brain. So, two things I wanted to talk about with respect to the left hemisphere, imaginative qualities of the brain. The first is that if you think about young children, the natural sort of play they engage in, and these are incidentally not my ideas, these are things I'm relating that I have read and studied, but I wanted to share them because they're so relevant to the world that we're living in, and in particular they challenge some of the paradigms of child rearing that seem to be so prevalent now, and the ways that children are occupied by busy parents who need to have some way to control their kids. I was at a soccer tournament yesterday, and one of the referees had his young son there with him, and he desperately was trying to find another iPhone, a smartphone with video games, so that his son could be occupied while he was reffing the game. 5-year-old son. And one of the things we know about video games and television are that they do have cognitive implications, and here are the ones that I wanted to share. And hopefully they will challenge our willingness to let kids be exposed to huge amounts of media that may have a really adverse impact on the cognitive functioning of the brain. So the first one I wanted to talk about was some of the natural behavior children engage in when they're creating play rather than being engaged in a game of some kind that doesn't involve imagination, like a video game. When kids are involved in what I would call more imaginative play, where they have objects around them that they have to assemble and play with, you'll notice that children engage in role play, where they have several different toys or objects that are talking to each other. Like a car might be going, I'm going to park over here, I'm going to move my... Hey, you better get out of my way. Oh, I'm not going to get out of your way because this was here first. Well, maybe we should go up the tree. Okay. And they're engaged in this constant back and forth of taking different perspectives of these characters, and kids do this for hours. And one of the cognitive functions of that sort of play is that it builds the capacity in the adult, the later adult, to very quickly identify other perspectives in a situation. So an adult might have a sudden impulse to say something or do something, and what they call the executive function of the mind will step in and really quickly identify the host of options by looking at different perspectives, and then will identify one that's most appropriate given the situation and the history of the players in that situation. And young kids who have aborted that natural form of play through interactive video games where they're not taking perspective and taking on roles, the executive function doesn't have that capacity to develop, and these children can be incredibly impulsive and have a really difficult time attending to tasks for long periods of time. Partly because the attending to a task is also a form of impulse control. Well, I don't want to do this anymore, I think I'm going to go over there and look at that. Or I'm getting bored, I'm going to look at that. Whereas the brain normally wants to step in and go, no, continue to watch it. Oh, no, you need to keep watching. So this sort of internal voice that gives direction gets aborted the development of that cognitive capacity gets undermined by extensive interactions with games like videos that don't allow for that ongoing chatter that children do when they're playing. So we want to let kids engage, young kids for years. They want to, between the ages of say 3 and 9, they want to be involved in these games where they're taking on roles and you hear that voice going all the time. I want to certainly encourage that. And then the other one I wanted to mention was how television and movies also interfere with the imaginative capacity, and this is largely the visualizing capacity of the brain. When you're watching a television program or a movie, you're getting the story and you're getting the images. Well, the human brain evolved for thousands and thousands of years through oral story. That was the form of entertainment, and oral story forces the brain, or asks of the brain, to do its own imagining and visualizing. And adults that haven't had the capacity as young children to do a lot of imagining because they've been planted in front of a television often have a hard time visualizing. And the implications of that visualizing are not just, well, maybe they're not as good at art or something, but when you want to solve a problem in your life, not just like a math problem, but when you have a complex situation, you want to be able to see all the pieces, literally visualize in some schematic way all the relevant components of the situation and the problem. And without having had the opportunity to do that growing up, by age 12, 13, the brain starts to prune out those abilities. And so extensive exposure to media like television can undermine the imaginative capacities and then the problem-solving capacities that are natural to the human brain. And so these are some of the implications of the technology that we've introduced in the last 50 years and that's become ubiquitous in the last 10 years, that it's going to have significant cognitive impacts on the adults that have gone through lots of their childhood with television and video, is that they're going to have limited capacity to engage in that kind of perspective taking that controls impulses, and that visualization and imagination that allows you to frame problems from diverse angles to solve them. And we don't really know what those implications are in the long run, but we need to begin to consider them if we want to have adults that have a healthy cognitive capacity to function in the world, to interact with other people, and to solve problems. So Tribal Jazzman Scholar will sign off with that. Thanks for joining me.